Mira Voss had been cleaning up after animals since she was 9 years old, back when it was just the neighbor's dog and a bag of stale bread she wasn't supposed to give it. She never grew out of it. She just grew into a bigger version of the same job, at a bigger place, with animals that could actually kill her if they wanted to. The Kesterland Wolf Reserve sat at the edge of the mountains, past the last gas station that still took cash, down a gravel road that ate car tires for fun. It wasn't fancy. Half the buildings had tin roofs that groaned every time the wind picked up, and the office smelled like wet dog, even on days when it hadn't rained in a week. But it was a job, and Mira needed a job the way a person needs air, which is to say quietly, constantly, and without much room to complain about the quality of it. She worked the night shift, not because she loved the dark, but because the night shift meant nobody around to talk to her like she was something that needed managing. The day manager, a man named Denny who breathed through his mouth even when his mouth wasn't doing anything important, had a way of hovering near her that made her skin feel like it belonged to someone else. Nights, it was just her, a headlamp, a bucket, and the wolves, and one wolf in particular, who watched her like he was grading her work. They called him Ash, not because of his coat, which was black going on charcoal, but because of the way he held himself, like a fire that had burned everything it needed to burn and now just sat there, radiating heat without needing to prove it could burn you too. He ran the compound. Not officially. Nobody at Kesterland gave a wolf a job title, but everybody who worked there knew it. When Ash moved, the others moved out of his way. When Ash lay down in his corner, the whole yard exhaled. Mira called him the Alpha King. Not to his face, obviously. He didn't seem like the type who needed the compliment. Ash had a pup. That was new. Reserve wolves didn't usually breed. There were rules, permits, a whole apparatus of paperwork that Mira didn't fully understand and had no interest in understanding. But something had slipped through the cracks the year before, and now there was a small black shape running around the enclosure that the other pups in the litter wanted absolutely nothing to do with. They called him Ruin. Mira thought that was a cruel thing to name a baby animal, but nobody had asked her opinion, and by the time she got the job, the name was already stuck to him like a burr in fur. Ruin was born deaf. Nobody could say exactly why. Genetics, a fluke, something in the blood that didn't unfold right. But the result was a pup that startled at shadows because he couldn't hear footsteps, who flinched at doors opening because he never got the warning creak, who lived his whole small life one step behind a world that talked in sound he couldn't receive. The other pups shunned him. Wolves are honest that way. They didn't understand why he didn't respond to their yips and grumbles, so they decided he was broken and left him to figure out the world by himself, in a corner of the enclosure that got the worst of the wind. Mira understood that particular kind of loneliness better than she wanted to admit. She grew up in a house where her mother called singing noise, not shouted it, not punished it, worse than that, just corrected it, the way you'd correct a slouch or a mispronounced word. Stop that noise, Mira, said so often and so calmly that by the time Mira was 12, she'd trained her own voice into a kind of permanent hush, like a radio turned down so low you had to lean in to know it was even on. She stopped singing in front of people. She still sang. She just made sure nobody was around to hear it, which was maybe why the night shift suited her so well. Nobody around. Nobody except 40 wolves who couldn't report her to anyone, and one small deaf pup who couldn't hear her at all. It started as an accident, the way most important things do. She was scrubbing out water troughs on a Tuesday. She remembered it was a Tuesday because Tuesdays were trough days, and trough days were the worst because Algie did not care about her schedule, and she was humming without noticing she was humming. An old thing, half a show tune, half something her grandmother used to hum over dishes. Not even words, just sound, low in her chest, the kind of hum a person does when their hands are busy and their guard is down. She didn't notice Ruin at first. He'd come up to the fence closest to her, which he never did, not with anyone, not even the handlers who brought his food. He'd pressed his whole side against the chain link, not looking at her, not really looking at anything, just standing there with his ribs against the metal like he was trying to plug himself into something. It took Mira 3 more troughs to realize what he was doing. He wasn't listening to her. He was feeling her. The hum traveled down through her chest, into her hands, into the metal bucket she was scrubbing, and, she guessed, though nobody had ever explained wolf physics to her, into the ground and the fence, and whatever thin threads of vibration a deaf pup's body had learned to read instead of sound. She stopped scrubbing. He didn't move. She started humming again, just to test it, feeling faintly ridiculous, like a woman conducting an experiment on a creature that had never signed a consent form. Ruin's ears, which never seemed to know what to do with themselves, went soft, down, loose. The particular kind of loose that meant a body had stopped bracing for something. Mira sat back on her heels and looked at him for a long time. Well, she said, to nobody, because nobody could hear her either. Not really, not since her mother trained the volume out of her. Figures, the one place I don't have to worry about being told to shut up, and it's a wolf who's already deaf. She laughed. It came out smaller than she meant it to. After that, she sang every night. Not loud, she still didn't know how to be loud, hadn't practiced it in years, but steady, low, aimed at the fence like a signal being broadcast on a frequency only one animal in the whole reserve could pick up. She didn't tell anyone. There was nobody to tell. Denny wouldn't have cared, and the other handlers came and went in the daylight, missing the whole thing entirely, the way people usually miss the good part if they're not paying attention at the right hour. Ruin started waiting for her. She'd come in for her shift, and he'd already be at the fence, body pressed flat, waiting for the hum to start traveling through the metal and into whatever quiet, sound-starved part of him needed it. Some nights, she caught herself grinning like an idiot at a wolf who couldn't grin back, who probably didn't even know what a grin was, and she didn't care. It felt like something. It felt like the first thing in a long time that hadn't been corrected out of her, and Ash watched. Always Ash. From his corner, the good one, the one that caught the last of the evening sun before the mountain swallowed it. He never moved when she was near his pup. He never postured, never bared anything, never did the things wolves in movies do when they're supposed to be scary. He just watched, with the kind of stillness that felt like it was keeping score. Mira started leaving him the good bucket. There were two, one dented on the side from some incident before her time, one clean, and she always made sure Ash got the clean one, like it mattered, like a wolf who ran the entire social order of a 40-animal compound was going to notice or care about the cosmetic condition of his water container. It probably didn't matter to him at all. It mattered to her. That was the part she didn't examine too closely. The reserve wasn't just Mira and the wolves, of course. There was Denny, who managed everyone from an office chair that had long since lost its ability to recline correctly. And there was Priya, who ran the medical side of things and had a laugh that could be heard from the parking lot. And there was an older man named Boone, who'd worked with wolves for 30 years, and said almost nothing, which Mira appreciated more than she could explain. Boone was the one who told her about Ruin's mother rejecting him first, before the rest of the litter followed her lead, the way packs sometimes do. Not out of cruelty, Boone said, but because a mother who senses a pup can't keep up with the pack sometimes pushes it out early, so the wild doesn't have to do it later, more brutally. Nature's not mean, Boone told her once, leaning on the fence with a coffee that had gone cold an hour before he remembered to drink it. It's just efficient. Efficient looks like meanness if you're the one getting cut loose. Mira thought about that a lot. She thought about her mother, who wasn't cruel either, not really, just efficient in her own way, sanding down anything in Mira that might have made her stand out, might have made her a target, might have made her a problem in a house that already had enough problems. She didn't tell Boone any of that. She just said, yeah, and kept scrubbing the trough. Weeks went by like that. Trough days and feeding days, and the particular hush of 2 a.m. when even the wolves seemed to be listening for something. Ruin grew. Not big. Deaf pups in the wild rarely got the chance to grow at all, Boone said. But Ruin had Kesterlin, had food that came on schedule, had, apparently, Mira, and by late autumn he was less pup and more half-formed wolf, gangly, ears too big for his head, still shunned by the litter but no longer looking quite so lost about it. Mira told herself she wasn't attached. She told herself this, the way people tell themselves things they know are false, the moment the words leave their mouth. Then came the storm. Nobody at Kesterland loved storm season, not really. The tin roofs turned into percussion instruments, the drainage ditches filled and overflowed, and every single generator on the property had a personality problem that only surfaced when the power actually needed to hold. That particular night, the one Mira would end up thinking about for years afterward, the storm came in faster than the weather service had predicted, faster than Denny's radio warned, faster than anyone had time to prep for. The power went out at 11:40 p.m. Mira knew the time because she'd been checking her watch, bored, waiting for the last of the evening feeding rounds to finish, and then the lights just weren't there anymore. Emergency lighting kicked in a few seconds later. Dim red bulbs along the walkway, stuttering, more warning than illumination, and somewhere in the dark she heard the generator try to catch and fail, try and fail again, the mechanical equivalent of a man clearing his throat before giving up on the sentence entirely. The wolves didn't love the dark, but they'd lived through storms before. Most of them retreated to their den boxes and rode it out the way animals do, with a kind of patience humans mostly lose by adulthood. Ruin didn't retreat. Ruin panicked. Mira understood it half a second after she heard, no, felt, through the ground, through the fence, through the sudden frantic scrabble of claws on wet concrete, what was happening. For a hearing wolf, a storm was noise and light and something to wait out. For Ruin, the storm had taken away the one thing he actually relied on. The generator's hum, that low mechanical vibration he'd learned to feel as normal, as safe, was gone. And without it, without any steady vibration to orient by, he had nothing. Just flashes of red light with no pattern he could feel coming. He was running the fence line, slamming his shoulder into the chain link. Again, the kind of blind panic that doesn't care about consequences because it's too busy being panic. Mira didn't think. She climbed the fence. She would tell people later, if she told anyone at all, which she mostly didn't, that this was the stupidest thing she'd ever done, climbing into an enclosure with an unpredictable young wolf mid-panic and an alpha male watching from the shadows. She would also tell them, if pressed, that she didn't regret it, not even a little, not even when her sleeve caught on the wire and tore a line down her forearm that would scar into a thin white seam she'd carry for the rest of her life. She got to Ruin. She didn't sing. Singing needed breath control she didn't have in that moment, needed a steadiness her hands weren't currently capable of. So she did the only other thing she could think of. She pressed her palm flat against his ribs, hard, the way you'd press a hand against a door to keep it from blowing open, and she breathed, loud, on purpose, in through the nose, out through the mouth, exaggerated, a foghorn of a breath, over and over, so the vibration of it would travel through her palm and into whatever place inside him still knew how to listen with skin instead of ears. It didn't fix it immediately, nothing that real ever does. But he stopped slamming into the fence. He turned toward her hand instead of away from it. His breathing, ragged and too fast, started to drag itself down toward the rhythm of hers, the way a struggling swimmer will sometimes match the stroke of someone stronger just because the pattern is right there to borrow. And that was when Ash crossed the yard. Mira felt it before she saw it. The ground carries more than people give it credit for. A weight moving, deliberate, unhurried, closer. She looked up expecting anything except what she got, which was nothing. No bared teeth, no lowered head, no posture that said, "Get away from my pup." He just walked, past her, past the panic, and lay down, not between Mira and Ruin, between the storm and Ruin. His body settled against the fence line like a wall being built on purpose, and for the first time in 4 months of night shifts, Mira watched the Alpha King leave his corner while a human being was standing where he could see her. Ruin's panic didn't vanish all at once. Panic never does. But his body, still shaking, still hunting for something steady to hold on to, found the new weight beside him. Found his father's ribs, his father's slower breath, a second vibration joining the one Mira's hand had already given him, and something in the small deaf wolf recalibrated. He turned his head, not toward the noise, because there was no noise for him to turn toward the feeling, toward the place where two heartbeats now sat close enough together that even a pup who'd never heard a single sound in his life could tell the difference between being alone and not being alone. Nobody explained it to Mira. Nobody needed to. She sat there with her torn sleeve and her ridiculous breathing, and watched a father who'd spent 4 months only ever observing finally decide to participate, and she understood, in the specific and unglamorous way that real understanding usually arrives, that she hadn't just been singing to a pup who couldn't hear her. She'd been proving, night after night, that showing up counts even when nobody can register the sound of you doing it. The generator caught around 1 in the morning. The lights came back in their ordinary, unremarkable way, without fanfare, the way important things often resolve, not with a burst of triumph, but with a small mechanical stutter, and then just normal again. The red emergency bulbs clicked off, the regular lights hummed on, and in that ordinary wash of yellow light, Mira Voss found herself sitting in wet mud, one sleeve torn open, one hand still resting on the ribs of a wolf, who was, for the first time she'd ever witnessed, sound asleep against his father's side. Ash didn't stay. Of course he didn't. By the time the sun came up, he was back in his corner, in his patch of early light, watching the yard the way he always watched it, like nothing at all had happened, like he hadn't just crossed 40 feet of open ground to do the one thing none of the staff had ever seen him do for anyone. Boone found Mira there in the morning, asleep sitting up against the fence, boots still on, the dented bucket beside her untouched, and still full of water nobody had needed during the night. He didn't ask what happened. He just looked at the torn sleeve and the sleeping pup curled against her leg, and said the only thing that felt right to say at 6 in the morning to a woman who looked like she'd been through something without quite being able to explain what. Figured you'd end up doing something like this eventually. Mira opened one eye. Figures, she said, which was the truest thing she knew how to say about most of her life, and closed it again. She kept working nights after that. Kept humming into troughs, kept leaving Ash the clean bucket even though she now understood, or thought she understood, that maybe it never had been about the bucket at all. Ruin grew taller, grew less gangly, grew into whatever version of himself a reserve could let a deaf wolf become. He still startled at shadows sometimes. He probably always would, but he stopped flinching quite so hard at doors, because somewhere along the way he'd learned that not everything unexpected was a threat. Some of it was just a woman with a bad singing voice, showing up anyway, night after night, because it turned out that was a kind of language too. And once in a while, usually right before dawn, when the yard was quiet and the light hadn't decided yet what color it wanted to be, Mira would look over at Ash's corner and find him already looking back, not scoring her anymore, just watching. The way you watch something you've already decided you don't need to worry about. She never did figure out if that counted as approval. She decided it was close enough.